Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we are here to break all things Knicks down with you. We have a great group today. We've got Chris Herring, ESPN NBA senior writer. We've got Ian O'Connor, longtime New York sports columnist, now working on a book on Aaron Rodgers, which is going to be a must read, but he's been around the Knicks for a long, long time. We've got Kaz Famuyide, who is with us via SNY. He's an SNY contributor, longtime Knicks fan. So, guys, let's get right into it. We were talking about game one. Knicks all called it a choppy game afterward, but they snuck out of there with a win. Probably got lucky on a couple calls late. Ian O'Connor, what was your big takeaway from game one?
Just that the Knicks found a way to win it. That's all that mattered. It did bring me back to the 1990s and being in the Garden, and it wouldn't have seemed appropriate if Pacers-Knicks didn't have some sort of controversial ending. And just that when your best player outscores their best player, 43-6, then you're going to win the game, right? And so the bench scoring was obviously a major storyline, and the Knicks overcame that. But it's just that Jalen Brunson is so good and just such a special player that you just feel in those moments, in those games, on that stage, he's going to find a way. And I think that's what I came away with. And also thinking, when you look around the league, look at what's happening to Denver, that the Knicks can win the NBA championship. I think that's what I left last night with, that yeah, I mean, this is a team that it seems that things are breaking their way and they make their own breaks. And obviously the great saying from Branch Rickey that luck is the residue of design, I think they embody that to some degree. And yeah, I think, Ian, that is my major takeaway, that I do think the Knicks are capable of winning the NBA championship.
And let me say this. I know Ian. We've worked together for many years, fortunate to work with him. He's not just going to say that to say that. He believes it. And that, to me, is telling, because he's, again, been around this team for so long. He's seen the lows and then more lows and then more lows. And now here he is watching this team come together. So to me, that's meaningful. Now, Kaz, for you, game one, Knicks obviously get the win. What was your big takeaway after that game?
The biggest takeaway I'd say from that game has to be that Villanova chemistry is really something special for this Knicks team. Feels like for years as a Knicks fan, the Knicks have been searching for stars, searching for marquee players, searching for all types of guys that could come in and sort of be the player that can lift up this Knicks franchise to championship level expectations. And I think they found that with these three players in Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, and Jalen Brunson, which is amazing to say. I don't think anybody would have said that at the beginning of the year, but you really have to put in the totality of what these three players have been through together, not just this past season, but for most of their basketball lives, right? These are people who have won 2 national championships together in college. They came together to play for the New York Knicks this year, obviously acquiring Josh Hart in a trade last year, then getting DiVincenzo this year. And then, this game, they were absolutely sensational. I mean, you had Josh Hart almost had another triple-double. Dante DiVincenzo with the clutch 3 at the end to get 25 points. And Jalen Brunson, I mean, when you're getting into conversations with Michael Jordan, there's not really much more you can live up to as far as being a superstar here in New York City. So I agree with Ian. The Knicks have just as good a chance as anybody to win it all this year.
When you look at kind of the Nova boys and then so many other different connections with this team, Leon Rose, Rick Brunson being Leon Rose's first client when he was an agent, Tom Thibodeau, the close relationship with Rick Brunson and knowing Jalen Brunson since he was a young boy. A lot of this, seems like storybook stuff. Now, we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if the Knicks reach where every Knicks fan would like them to reach, which is winning an NBA championship. But Ian, have you ever seen anything in sports where the three players are playing such a big role on a professional team after having teamed up together previously, as we're seeing with this Villanova trio?
Well, none come to mind. It might have happened in the past in a different sport. I can't remember this kind of situation in the NBA, and obviously it's working to a great degree for the Knicks, that chemistry. And it's interesting because I've had some people who are longtime Knicks fans ask me, do you think the Knicks are actually better off without Julius Randle? It sounds like a crazy question because he's their second best player and he's giving you 25 and 10, give or take, every night. But I don't think they are better off without Julius Randle. But I think what they are is good enough to overcome the absence of Julius Randle and to compete for a championship because of that Villanova chemistry that those guys have. And it's pretty special to watch. And I think some people old enough, I'm close to being one of those people, but who saw the Knicks championship teams in 70 and 73 and talking about chemistry that obviously those guys, they didn't have three guys who went to the same college or university, but they had incredible chemistry as far as sharing the ball, knowing where each other was on the court really at all times. And it feels like this Knicks team has that, and it might be their most lethal weapon as they go forward.
Fortunate to have Chris Herring back with us. Chris, your takeaway from game one, you were in the building, you covered the game. What was your big takeaway after watching it?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of a mix of what Ian and Kaz are both saying, that one, especially as you look across the way at the Western Conference, there's really not anything other than Indiana still, and then obviously Boston, I would assume, standing between the Knicks and potentially make it to the finals. They've had a lot of magic, but there's obviously a lot of skill and talent and just the tenacity of this team and the way they've been built and the way that they believe. They're absolutely capable of making it to the finals if they're playing their best basketball, if they put themselves in position to take advantage of the breaks that they get, like the one last night, like the craziness at the end of the Philly game, whether you want to call it officiating or whatever else. And there was help with the officiating last night. But I can't say enough either about just this team and the way that they kind of coalesced and really doubled down on something when Randall was lost for the year. The OG Anunoby trade has worked so much better than anyone could have imagined. I think that there were a lot of things that had opened up for them defensively. I think that there were a lot of things that opened for them offensively, quite frankly, that you've seen Dante get more opportunities as a shooter. And, you know, I said this, I wrote this at the time. They obviously lost something when Emmanuel Quickley was traded. I think they lost something even with Barrett, but I think that there was a lot more gain from the standpoint of spacing and OG being able to take advantage of that, Dante being able to take advantage of that. You've seen Josh Hart become more of a playmaker and all these triple doubles that he's either close to getting or that he actually is getting. I don't think anybody could have foreseen all of this happening and for Randall to be out of the mix and for them to still be a contender. But I think that the spacing that has been opened up by changing the rotation the way they did after the trade for OG, and quite frankly, even without Randall and all the pluses that he brings, I think there is more spacing. And I think what we've seen is that Jalen Brunson can take on the amount of usage that he's had on his shoulders. There's always a breaking point, and I don't think that he's hit it yet. And I think that he's kind of taken on a lot of what Barrett and obviously Randall left behind, and he's been able to do it somehow.
I'm going to come back to the minutes. I think, Chris, you make a great point there on the minutes load. I think everybody's kind of concerned about it when you look at that box score if you're a Knicks fan. But I want to go back to Julius Randle for one moment here because, you know, talking to some people around the team, I haven't gotten anyone to say even privately that this team is better without Julius Randle. I don't think it's a better team without Julius Randle. The one thing that I had heard and it makes sense to me is when Julius Randle comes back, it is a clearer hierarchy now that things run through Jalen Brunson. The ball is in Jalen Brunson's hands, and if it's going to work, I think Julius Randle, I don't want to say he's going to have to accept that or change anything because I think he has a team-first approach, and you saw how he played in January. He was a part of all that winning, and I think he played really well. But there's going to have to be a shift to some degree of Randle night in and night out.
You got to remember, in January and February, they weren't just beating teams. They were smashing teams, right? Like, that January and February was some of the best Knicks basketball I've seen in quite some time. But one point that he did bring up was, if you ask any Knicks fan, they may not say that they're better off without Randle, but they probably will say the Knicks are better off with the ball in Jalen Brunson's hand. And that hierarchy has been established. So, I'll take the baton from Ian real quick, and I'll throw it to you, Ian O'Connor. Talk to me a little bit about Jalen Brunson. I know we've talked about the Nova Knicks. We've talked about the possibility and obviously the load that they've carried for a lot of this time. But just let's talk about Jalen Brunson and just the incredible Jordan-like run he is on. I never thought we'd have anybody on the blue and orange have any Jordan-like runs in them, but we're seeing it live and living in color. 43 points, fourth straight, only player in NBA history to have a 40.5 playoff, 5 assist playoff streak. He's been incredible. Let's talk about Jalen Brunson.
Yeah, Kaz, I think obviously he's the best free agent signing in the history of the franchise. Now we look at the best free agent signings in the history of New York. And whether you're talking about Reggie Jackson, Mike Piazza, down to Adam Graves, and I guess Kevin Durant, you'd have to put in there, although there's an asterisk next to his name, just given the way that played out and how quickly he was out of there. But Jalen Brunson could ultimately end up, if he wins a championship or two in New York, as the best free agent signing in the history of the city, just given the drought. And the expectation coming in, at least, I don't know, Chris, how you felt or Kaz, but I wasn't sure when he signed with the Knicks if he was good enough to be the second best player on a championship team. I thought he was good. I had no idea he was going to be this. I now believe he can be the best player on a championship team. I think, Chris, you wrote about this recently, but you look at his body and you look at the things he doesn't have. And how does that translate to being an NBA superstar? His brain, his footwork, and the fact he's the son of a coach and a point guard. And he's a great selfless leader, even though he's getting 40 every night. He's not a selfish player. I don't think anyone would call him that. So when you look at everything, his lack of size and elite athleticism and really even foot speed, what he's able to do on a nightly basis against the best players in the world is unbelievable. It really is one of the most staggering things. I've been covering New York sports for close to 40 years. And it really is unbelievable to watch, and hopefully they'll carry it forward.
There seems like there is something special going on right now. Brunson, it starts with Brunson, obviously, but the minutes were brought up earlier. And Chris, I'm curious to hear your take because you watched it last night. Going forward, is it sustainable, the minutes allotment last night? I think the 26 total minutes off the bench in game one. Can that work over the course of a playoff run? Does Thibodeau have to adjust his approach? What do you think?
I think it's going to be tough, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, you had kind of a perfect storm of the Nova Knicks all playing their tails off yesterday. And I can't remember. I wish I had it pulled up. I should have had it pulled up in anticipation of this convo. But just the three of them, how much they scored, how much they assisted, they were essentially responsible for everything last night. And you obviously saw it reflected in the bench totals. The Pacers have the highest scoring bench in the league. They showed that last night. One, I think if this series is played at a high level pace, with the Pacers being basically the second fastest team in the league, the Knicks being the slowest team in the league, it's going to wear on the Knicks over the course of the series, especially with them playing every other day, at least for these first three games. But also, let's keep in mind, like, this is a series that, sitting next to people on press row yesterday, there were some people thinking that this would be a 4 or 5 game series. Whether that was fair or not, the Pacers obviously have the ability to push the Knicks. Halliburton did not play well at all, and he's obviously hindered right now with his back. But if the Pacers have the ability to push the Knicks, this is the Pacers. This is a team that, was not an elite team necessarily during the season, at least not once Halliburton was hurt. And the Celtics are potentially waiting in the next round, and that's a team with depth. So I don't think that they're going to be able to go 7 deep for the remainder of the playoffs and come out and win a title. The fact that we're having the conversation is great for them because they lost Bogdanovich, they lost Randle, they've had other guys hurt during this process, but this is part of what it is to win a championship, is normally that you've got to go at least 7 deep, probably 8 deep meaningfully. And I think, quite frankly, too, we're seeing that with the Nuggets a little bit. Someone like Bruce Brown, who obviously was with the Pacers, not having someone that can really help carry the load and take some of this off Brunson, especially without there being a key second guy, I think is really meaningful when you get deeper into the playoffs.
It's interesting you mentioned the Nuggets. I know some of the key stakeholders over there were not thrilled that Bruce Brown was not brought back, and now you're kind of seeing the effects of that so far in that Minnesota series. Ian O'Connor, Knicks-Pacers, the history. We all know it, but you know it intimately. You were in the building for a lot of it. What's it like to see this iteration, and what sticks out in your mind all these years later of those Knicks-Pacers series and the rivalry way back when?
Yeah, every time I think of Knicks-Pacers, and I tweeted this yesterday, I go back to Game 3 in '94, and the Knicks won the first two games at home. This is the old Market Square Arena, and the Knicks scored 68 points in Game 3. They lose by 20. It was an embarrassing effort, mostly by Patrick Ewing, who went 0 for 10, had 1 point in that game in, I believe, 29 minutes. And I remember waiting outside that locker room, and the door opens, and you go in, and Patrick, no matter how poorly he played, and the guy is a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the best players of all time, so he rarely played poorly, but he was terrible in this game, and he was always sitting there at his locker, ready to talk no matter what, and I still can see his face. He had a little bit of a smile on his face and sort of waved us over, had those ice packs on his knees, and just took total accountability for his non-performance. Then, of course, in Game 7 that year, he had 24 points, 22 rebounds, 7 assists, and 5 blocks, and maybe his greatest performance ever to send the Knicks to the finals. So, yeah, it was always it was Reggie Miller in the middle of everything, and John Starks, and those were wild times and great series. And I just think, and seeing it again, and not covering it day to day anymore, being more of a full-time author now, I'm just glad that the Garden and the fans today are getting to experience it. And Game 1 certainly didn't let anyone down. I think the rest of the series will sort of go to that 90s form. It's going to be very close, very physical. There'll be other controversies that will pop up. I think the Knicks will win the series. I wouldn't be absolutely shocked if the Pacers found a way. But I just think it's fun for those of us who saw every series in the 90s to witness it again, and to see it played at that level, I think is a good thing for all involved.
Kaz, Reggie Miller, Game 2 on the call. What's it like for you watching the game, Reggie on the call? Are you angry? Are you ambivalent? What's your reaction when you hear Reggie?
One of my earliest memories as a Knicks fan was watching my mom almost flip a bed over when Reggie Miller scored those 8 points in 30 seconds. So anytime I hear Reggie Miller calling a Knicks game, I still get that memory in my head, right? But if there's any color commentator out there that I want calling this Knicks greatness, this Knicks team that has a player of Jalen Brunson's caliber, that has a character of this team that even a casual NBA fan could get behind, it's Reggie Miller. I want that guy that has caused us so much pain over the years to be calling when the New York Knicks eventually get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not mad at it at all. I think a lot of people out there, granted, shout out to Mike Breen and Claude Frazier, 2 Hall of Famers. If it was my choice, I'd love to have them call every single Knicks game. But, if I had any choice outside of those 2 legends calling Knicks games that the world are watching, it's got to be Reggie. I want him to have a front row seat when the Knicks are making history and getting to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Chris, we're going to wrap soon, but I want to hear your thoughts on how Tyrese Haliburton was defended last night. What did you see that worked? Was it a product of him trying to get other people involved? Was it a product of Dante DiVincenzo and the group really stifling him? What did you see?
I think it was Dante hounding him and forcing him to go kind of whichever way it seemed like he didn't want to. He was often forced to kind of go to his left. He was hounded a little bit in the backcourt, and so you're making him kind of work the entire possession. There was a lot of talk last night about how the Knicks were having to face that, and Brunson was having to face that with TJ McConnell, but I felt like the Knicks did a pretty good job with Haliburton as well and making him play the whole court. But let's be honest here, and I said this to Brian Windhorst yesterday while he was sitting next to me at the game. He was like, man, Haliburton really isn't scoring much. And it's really been kind of a second half of the season issue for him ever since I think he had a hamstring injury, and he acknowledged, he was the first one to say the threshold that the league put in place for the 65 games for the award stuff, which he'll probably make an all NBA team, was on his mind. And then he was kind of playing through injury. And I'm not convinced he was ever fully over it. He's had a couple games where he scored more, but he has not been nearly the scorer that he was around the time of the in-season tournament when we saw him earlier in the year. So I think that to expect him to be scoring 25 or even 20 every game of the series is not realistic. I just don't think that that's the type of scorer he's been for the majority of the second half of the season. But the Knicks did a great job on him. I was kind of surprised that he threw the ball away as often as he did. It's really uncharacteristic for him, whether he's scoring or not, for him to not take care of the ball.
Yeah, the Knicks also uncharacteristically turning it over a lot. Game one, that was something they talked about, wanting to clean up, needing to clean up, going into game two. Kaz, that brings me to you. Kaz's keys for game two. Let's get into it.
All right, Kaz's keys for game two. Number one, stop me if you heard this before. Surprise. Defense and containing the pace. The Pacers have yet to win a playoff game this year when they didn't score 120 points. And in that first game in game one, they scored 117 points. Now, if the Knicks can keep pace with them, that's great. But what you want from them to do is to establish their defensive identity, keep the pace down, keep the Knicks playing mistake-free, turnover-less basketball. Number two, we just talked about it before. Tame Tyrese. Halliburton's numbers haven't been good this playoffs. He just mentioned it, 16.9 points per game since February, especially since that hamstring injury. And against the Bucks, you got to make him play some defense, right? Like he did get 4 steals yesterday. A lot of those steals came off the passing lane, but you need Josh Hart to be aggressive on him. You need DiVincenzo to be aggressive on him. And of course, if you get a one-on-one with Jalen Brunson, I don't think you need to tell him twice, especially after that USA basketball snub. You need him to attack Tyrese Halliburton as much as possible. And number three, I said it already, it's got to be number 11, JB. I don't know what more we could say about him this postseason, but you got to ride that hot hand until he's not hot anymore. He is doing Michael Jordan level production in this postseason. And in crunch time, you either get ready to shoot when he collapses the defense or just get the hell out of the way because he's been absolutely unstoppable in the fourth quarter and is probably playing like the best player in the NBA these playoffs so far. This side of Anthony Edwards, Jalen Brunson has been absolutely unbelievable. He's going to be the key to getting the Pacers out of here.
There's the 3 keys from Kaz. Thank you. Go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say, can I add one key to Kaz's keys for the Knicks anyway? I think they're going to have to play through some officiating in game two because it seemed like the Pacers got a raw deal at the end of game one, and officials are human. I think the NBA was maybe a little embarrassed by some of those calls late, and I wouldn't be surprised if Tibbs is going to say to the Knicks, you're going to have to, even though we're home, you're going to have to play through maybe some tough officiating late in this game, and that's something they should be aware of.
Jalen Brunson doesn't really take a lot of bad shots. His footwork, his IQ, his ability to stay off balance, and not for nothing, I don't think the Indiana Pacers have anybody that could guard him anyway, right? Like, I think the 76ers had a better game plan to really subdue Jalen Brunson, and we saw that in the first 2 games with the length of Kelly Oubre, the length of Nicholas Batum, and Tobias Harris in certain spaces. But I just don't think the combination of Nesmith, Nembhard, or even a hobbled Tyrese Halliburton really has the ability to stay in front of Jalen Brunson. It feels like every shot he takes. He only took 4 threes yesterday. I think he took a lot more threes in the Sixers series, but all of his buckets came from getting to the hoop, getting to the free throw line, and those mid-range just turnaround fadeaways that just seem to be like he just never misses those type of shots. And if you're taking mid-range shots with the ability to offensive rebound that the Knicks have, they're never bad shots because you got an opportunity with Mitch Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein, and especially Josh Hart to go and get a second and sometimes third opportunity to get on the offensive glass. So mid-range, especially if you shoot a long-range three, those threes bounce off far. And with the Indiana Pacers, you don't want to get running up and down with them. So I think that was by design that Jalen Brunson took a lot of mid-range shots and gave their team a lot more opportunities to get offensive rebounds. But you're right, man. He is efficient. He's been iconic, legendary sort of run that he's on right now. Bernard King level stuff that he's doing. But it's the way he's getting the shots and putting his team in position to, even if when he misses, giving them an opportunity to get a second and third opportunity on the glass and continue scoring.
I'm going to wrap in a minute here, guys. But Ian, I need your take on this because you wrote a book about Derek Jeter. Covered him very briefly towards the end of his career. Just listening to Jalen Brunson, listening to the way he approaches the media, and just the way he approaches the game. I've said it to him, and I've said it to other people. It reminds me of Jeter, to a degree. For you, what you're seeing from him, what you saw from Jeter, do you see any similarities there?
I do. It's funny that you bring that up, Ian, because last year, and I every time I ended up at the Garden, I wrote about Jalen Brunson, and Tim Bontemps of ESPN kept giving me grief for doing that. And I felt like I could see this special thing developing and unfolding like it did with Jeter in New York. And I was a columnist in Jeter's rookie year with the Yankees. And obviously Jalen was not a rookie with the Knicks, but it almost felt like a new marriage and a new career for him. And yeah, I did feel like I can kind of see this marriage being very blissful and long-term, like I did with a young Jeter, how it all came together. I think there are similarities in the way they carry themselves. I think they're great, both great representatives of their franchises. And I think Jalen Brunson, it's like I feel he's the right one to end the drought. He's the right star to win a championship in New York. I do think that will happen. I'm not sure it's going to be this year. But at this point, what we're seeing from him, and I suspect he'll get even better, is I would be really surprised if he does not win a championship before he's done playing for the New York Knicks.
Wow, that's heady stuff, and I understand why you're saying what you're saying. And we're going to leave it here, guys. This is what I need from you. Series prediction after Game 1. Kaz, what do you have?
I said it before Game 1. I'm sticking to it. I got the Knicks in 5 games. I think they take one in Indiana and they wrap it back home in Madison Square Garden.
Ian Oak, what do you think?
I want to agree with Kaz. I'll say Knicks in 6. I think that the Pacers might actually steal Game 2 and certainly make this a series. But the Knicks are the better team. I think they're the tougher team. And I, at the start of the playoffs, had them losing in Boston in Game 7 in the conference finals. I'll stick with that, though. If I were the Celtics, I'd be very concerned about what I'm seeing from the New York Knicks right now.
Ian O'Connor, we miss your Knicks coverage, but be sure to keep an eye out for his Aaron Rodgers tome. It's coming, and it's going to be fantastic. Kaz, we really appreciate you. We appreciate your perspective, and I hope the bed turned out okay after your mom flipped it so many years ago. Fellas, really
it's in a junkyard somewhere, but yes, we've made good. We've made do since.
Fellas, thank you so much for your perspective. That's going to do it for us this week. We will be back sometime after Game 4 here on the Putback, but be sure to keep an eye out every night. Honda Sports Night, you will have your nightly Knicks coverage there, and we will see you soon.